Hi, everyone. Nice to see you today. I've been reading from the book The Borrowers by Mary Norton, and today I will read chapter 10. So Ariete told him about borrowing, how difficult it was, and how dangerous. She told him about the storerooms under the floor, about Pod's early exploits, the skills he had shown, and the courage she described and the courage. She described those far off days before her birth when Pod and Homily had been rich. She described the musical snuff box of gold filigree and the little bird which flew out of it made of kingfisher feathers, how it flapped its wings and sang its song. She described the doll's wardrobe and the tiny green glasses, the little silver teapot out of the drawing room case, the satin bedclothes and embroidered sheets. Those we have still, she told him. They are her handkerchiefs. She? The boy realized gradually that was his great Aunt Sophie upstairs, bedridden since a hunting accident some 20 years before. He heard how Pod would borrow from her room, picking his way in the firelight among the trinkets on her dressing table, even climbing her bed curtains and walking on her quilt, and of how she would watch him and sometimes talk to him because, Ariete explained, every day at 6 o'clock they brought her a decanter of fine old pale Madeira, and how before midnight she would drink the lot. Nobody blamed her, not even Homily, because, as Homily would say, she had so few pleasures, poor soul. But Ariete explained, after the first 3 glasses, Great Aunt Sophie never believed in anything she saw. She thinks my father comes out of the decanter, says Ariete, and one day when I'm older, he's going to take me there, and she'll think I come out of the decanter too. It'll please her, my father thinks, as she's used to him now. Once he took my mother, and she perked up like anything and kept asking after her and why she doesn't come anymore, saying they'd watered the Madeira because once, she said, she saw a little man and a little woman, and now she only sees a little man. I wish she thought I came out of the decanter, said the boy. She gives me dictation and teaches me to write. I only see her in the mornings when she's cross. She sends for me and looks behind my ears and asks Mrs. D if I've learned my words. What does Mrs. D look like? Asked Ariete. How delicious it was to say Mrs. D like that. How careless and daring. She's fat and has a mustache and gives me my bath and hurts my bruise and sore elbow, and she'll take a slipper to me one of these days. The boy pulled up a tuft of grass and stared at it angrily, and Ariete saw his lip tremble. My mother's very nice, he said. She lives in India. Why did you lose all your worldly riches? Well, said Ariete, the kitchen boiler burst and hot water came pouring through the floor into our house and everything was washed away and piled up in front of the grating. My father worked night and day, first hot, then cold, trying to salvage things. And there's a dreadful draft in March through the grating. He got ill, you see, and he couldn't go borrowing. So my Uncle Hendry had to do it, and one or two others, and gave my mother things, bit by bit, for their trouble. But for the kingfisher bird was spoiled by the water. All of its feathers fell off, and a great twirling spring came jumping out of its side. My father used the spring to keep the door shut against the drafts and the grating, and my mother put the feathers in a little moleskin hat. After a while, I got born, and my father went borrowing again. But he gets tired now and doesn't like curtains, not when any of the baubles are off. I helped him a bit, said the boy, with the teacup. He was shivering all over. I suppose he was frightened. My father frightened, exclaimed Ariete angrily. Frightened of you, she added. Perhaps he doesn't like heights, said the boy. He loves heights, said Ariete. The thing he doesn't like is curtains. I've told you, curtains make him tired. The boy sat thoughtfully on his haunches, chewing a blade of grass. Borrowing, he said after a while. Is that what you call it? Well, what else would you call it? Asked Ariete. I call it stealing. Ariete laughed. She really laughed. But we are borrowers, she explained, like you're a human being or whatever it's called. We're part of the house. You might as well say the fire grate steals the coal from the coal scuttle. Then what is stealing? Ariete looked grave. Don't you know? She asked. Stealing is, well, supposing my Uncle Hendry borrowed an emerald watch from her dressing table, and my father took it and hung it on our wall. That's stealing. An emerald watch, exclaimed the boy. Well, I just said that because we have one on the wall at home, but my father borrowed it himself. It needn't be a watch. It could be anything. A lump of sugar even, but borrowers don't steal. Except from human beings, said the boy. Ariette burst out laughing. She laughed so much that she had to hide her face in the primrose. Oh dear, she gasped with tears in her eyes. You are funny. She stared upward at his puzzled face. Human beings are for borrowers, like bread's for butter. The boy went silent a while. A sigh of wind rustled the cherry trees and shivered among the blossoms. Well, I don't believe it, he said at last, watching the falling petals. I don't believe that's what we're for at all, and I don't believe we're dying out. Oh, goodness, exclaimed Ariette impatiently, staring up at his chin. Just use your common sense. You're the only real human being I ever saw, although I do just know of 3 more. Camp for her and Mrs. Driver. But I know lots and lots of borrowers. The overmantels and the harpsichords and the rain barrels and the linen presses and the boot racks and the Honorable John Studdingtons and... He looked down. John Studdington? But he was our grand uncle. Well, this family lived behind a picture, went on Ariette, hardly listening. And there were the stovepipes and the bell pulls and the... Yes, he interrupted. But did you see them? I saw the harpsichords, and my mother was a bell pull. The others were before I was born. He leaned closer. Then where are they now? Tell me that. My Uncle Hendreary has a house in the country, said Ariette coldly, edging away from his great lowering face. It was misted over, she noticed, with hairs of palest gold, and 4 children, harpsichords and clocks. But where are the others? Oh, said Ariette, they're somewhere. But where? She wondered, and she shivered slightly in the boy's cold shadow, which lay about her slantwise on the grass. He drew back again, his fair head blocking out a great piece of sky. Well, he said deliberately after a moment, and his eyes were cold, I've only seen 2 borrowers, but I've seen hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of... Oh, no, whispered Ariette, of human beings, and he sat back. Ariette stood very still. She did not look at him. After a while, she said, I don't believe you. All right, he said, then I'll tell you. I still won't believe you, murmured Ariette. Listen, he said, and he told her about the railway stations and football matches and racecourses and royal processions and Albert Hall concerts. He told her about India and China and North America and the British Commonwealth. He told her about July sales. Not hundreds, he says, but thousands and millions and billions and trillions of great, big, enormous people. Now do you believe me? Ariette stared at him with frightened eyes. It gave her a crick in the neck. I don't know, she whispered. As for you, he went on, leaning close again, I don't believe there are any more borrowers anywhere in the world. I believe you're the last 3, he said. Ariette dropped her face into the primrose. We're not. There's Aunt Loopy and Uncle Hendreary and all the cousins. I bet they're dead, said the boy. And what's more, he went on, no one will ever believe that I've seen you. And you'll be the very last because you're the youngest. One day, he told her, smiling triumphantly, you'll be the only borrower left in the world. He sat still, waiting, but she did not look up. Now you're crying, he remarked after a moment. They're not dead, said Ariette in a muffled voice. She was feeling in her little pocket for a handkerchief. They live in a badger's set 2 fields away beyond the spiny. We don't see them because it's too far. There are weasels and things and cows and foxes and crows. Which spiny? He asked. I don't know, Ariette almost shouted. But it's along a gas pipe, a field called Parkin's Beck. She blew her nose. I'm going home, she said. Don't go, he said. Not yet. Yes, I'm going, said Ariette. His face turned pink. Let me just get the book, he pleaded. I'm not going to read to you now, said Ariette. Why not? She looked at him with angry eyes. Because... Listen, he said. I'll go to that field. I'll go and find Uncle Hendreary and the cousins and Aunt whatever she is, and if they're alive, I'll tell you. What about that? You could write them a letter, and I'll put it down the hall. Ariette gazed up at him. Would you? She breathed. Yes, I would. Really, I would. Now, can I go and get the book? I'll go in by the side door. All right, said Ariette absently. Her eyes were shining. When can I give you the letter? Any time, he said, standing above her. Where in the house do you live? Well, began Ariette, and she stopped. Why, once again, did she feel this chill? Could it only be his shadow towering above her, blotting out the sun? I'll put it somewhere, she said hurriedly. I'll put it under the hall mat. Which one? The one by the front door? Yes, that one. He was gone, and she stood there alone in the sunshine, shoulder deep in grass. What had happened seemed too big for thought. She felt unable to believe it had really happened. Not only had she been seen, but she had been talked to. Not only had she been talked to, but she had... Arietti, said a voice. She stood up and startled and spun around, and there was Pod, moon-faced on the path looking at her. Come on down, he whispered. She stared at him for a moment as though she did not recognize him. How round his face was, how kind, how familiar. Come on, he said again more urgently, and obediently, because he sounded worried, she slithered quickly towards him off the bank, balancing her primrose. Put that thing down, he said sharply when she stood at last beside him on the path. You can't lug great flowers about. You gotta carry a bag. What you want to go up there for? He grumbled as they moved across the stones. I might never have seen you. Hurry up now. Your mother will have tea waiting. And I do have a picture of the day. And that is the lady of the house conversing with Pod, as Pod's visiting her as she's sipping her afternoon cocktail. And that, folks, is the end of chapter 10. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you tomorrow for chapter 11. Bye.